Shalom, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to have an interesting Bible study today, and it's going to be the second part of a series that we started last week about the Purim, all right, which was the Feast of Esther, and it's called Haman and the Tree of Knowledge, and the Purim, redeeming Eden's first sin, and this is part 2. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that you'll enjoy this as much as I have in actually putting it together. And so before we start, of course, I would like to pray and just ask the Lord to be in the midst of this, because if it's I want it to be about Him and not about me. So let us pray. And also, if you would like to send in comments or anything asking for prayer, please send them in and we will get back to you as quickly as possible. It's extremely important that we can pray for each other and be close, even in a time when we maybe can't be physically close, but we can be spiritually close. And that's the most important thing, people. Okay? So, Father, thank you for this time that we get to be together to share your word, and that may you be glorified in everything we do, that this is not about us, it's about you, and we simply want to share with others really fun things that we discover about your scriptures. So I ask that you will guide me in everything I do in this time, and may it be a blessing to others who are listening or watching. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. Amen. So thank you again for joining me today, everybody. I really do appreciate if you listen and if you're a part of this. Now, in this series, we're talking about studying the connections of Haman, who we know is a very bad man who wanted to kill Mordecai and all of the Israelites during the time of Queen Esther. Okay, so we're going to go back to this kind of a strange statement that some rabbis make, where they say that there is a hint to Haman within the story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Please don't mind my throat. I've been just talking for a long time earlier. And it says, Hamin Ha'etz, was it from the tree that I told you not to eat from that you ate? In fact, the rabbis seem to be identifying Haman with Adam right after he'd eaten from the tree. So, what evidence do they have to suggest this? So this is a conclusion of last week's Bible study that we started about this subject. Is there something about Haman's behavior that reminds us of Adam's behavior when eating the forbidden fruit? So let's try this. Okay, remember Adam in the garden. God had elevated Adam above all the other creatures of the world, all the other animals, and God, the King of Kings, had given Adam everything. Okay, in Hebrew it says, Mikol etz hagan ochol tohed. God had told Adam, okay, from all the trees of the garden, you may surely eat. Paradise is open to you. All right, so there's just one thing you can't have. It's that tree over there, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't touch that. That's my special tree. Okay, so what happens then? Adam and Eve, who have just been allowed to eat from any possible tree, go and just head for the one thing that they can't have. Kind of like a little kid, when you say, hey, don't go in the kitchen, don't reach your hand into the cookie jar, don't be eating the cookies. What is that kid gonna go and do? He's gonna go and get the one thing you told him not to get. Hey, you can have all these toys in this toy room, in this toy box. Yes! Don't touch my keys over there. I need them for the car. Okay. What's the kid gonna do? He doesn't want his toys. He wants to go play with that one thing you told him not to play with. Naturally, kids love to play with keys anyway. I don't know why. So, kind of reminds us of our human behavior at any day and age. Okay. So it's almost like it means nothing to them. Okay, all those trees you could have, we don't even have any evidence that they ever even ate from one of them. The only thing that mattered to them was the one tree they couldn't have. Of course, we don't know how much time really happened to pass between the time that they were actually created until the time they actually ate from the fruit of the tree. It could have been an hour, it could have been a day, it could have been a week, a month, year, a years. It could have been 100 years, 1,000 years. We don't never know because the Bible doesn't talk about it, okay? Because at that time they could live forever and ever as long as they had the tree of life. So the Bible doesn't get into that. I think it would be nice if they could have told us how much time passed by, but they didn't. All right. So now who does this remind of us in the Megillah? What is the Megillah? The Megillah is the story of Esther. All right. So that is Haman. The man, like I said, was elevated above all the other king's servants. He was given power just as man had been given in the original garden. All right. Power over all. But here was this man who is everything, and listen to what happens. Okay. On his way out from the palace one day, as everybody was bowing to him, out of the corner of his eye, he sees Mordecai, the one guy who's just sitting there. Hey, I'm not going to bow to you. And he becomes angry. He's enraged. He then goes home and gathers all his close friends and family. It says, Vayesaper lahim Haman. Haman told him this. Kevod ushro, how rich I am. Verov banav, how many children he has. And that kol asher gidlo hamelech, and how the king had elevated him. All right. And then asher nizo al hasarim be'avdei hamelech, how the king had brought him above all the other servants of the kingdom. Vayomer Haman, and then Haman said, "You want to hear how great I am? Af lo hevia Esther hamalka im hamelech." The queen didn't invite anyone else to this great feast that she is making. All right, so now we're speaking about the feast that the king or the Queen Esther had invited him to. Obviously, this is a little later. Okay, ki im oti, except for me. I'm the only one she invited. That him and the king, of course. Gam lemachar ani karula im hamelech. Even tomorrow, I'm going to eat with her again. Look at me, I've been exclusively invited to dine with the king. And then shockingly he says this, Bechod ze enenu shoved li, and none of this matters, and not one bit to me. Bechod et asher ani roe et Mordechai hayehudi yoshev b'sha'ar hamelech. Every time I see that Mordecai guy sitting there and not bowing to me, it means nothing to me. The rest of this means nothing. Going to eat with the king and queen means nothing to me. Nothing. This is the same situation with Adam with the forbidden fruit. I have everything, but it means nothing because there's only one thing I cannot have. So how do we understand the spirit of Haman? So we've got to kind of feel sorry for the guy, right? I personally think he's a pathetic loser. This guy's got so much stuff, and he's got all these riches, and he's got this great position. So listen to how pathetic this guy is. I mean, he's calling together his wife and family to tell them how many children he has. Seems a little weird to me because you'd think they would know, right? They're his family. So how much money he has, I think they know. So it's been like he's trying to desperately convince them of his wonderfulness. And he really does have everything. So what was the pinnacle of everything for Haman? It was how he was called to dine with the king and queen. That was just like Adam too, if you think about it. Adam's great gift is this ability to dine with the king of kings. He's there in God's garden, and he has all these fruits, vegetables, all these trees that God made. If he would eat them in God's presence in the garden, what is he really doing? He's dining with the king. But yet both of these people are in exactly the same position. It all means nothing to them because of the one thing they can't have. And this is really sad. All right. Now, I don't think that's all. I think there's a little more to it, though. Let's see if the continuation of the story continues to remind us of the Tree of Knowledge episode. Okay, so let's speak of Haman and the forbidden fruit. So the next thing that happens is that Zeresh, Haman's wife, responds to him and she says, Yasu etz gavoa chamishim amma. Why don't you make a gallows 50 amot high? Maybe it's 50 cubits, 50 feet. I don't know. It's really high, though. It's abnormally high for a gallows. Okay. Ubaboker emor el hamelech. And in the morning you go to the king and you ask him for permission to hang Mordecai on it. You'll have the one thing that so far eluded you until now. So what does that remind us of in the garden? Adam was offered the fruit, the forbidden fruit, the one thing he couldn't have. And by Eve, it was offered to him by Eve, just like Haman's wife Zeresh tells him now, well, why don't you just have the one thing that you haven't been able to have? So isn't it interesting what the gallows are called in Hebrew, though? It's not just gallows, it's Yasu Eitz. And literally the word Eitz is not a gallows, it's tree. Okay, now we're talking a tree of knowledge all over again. Okay, it's one thing you can't have. She's offering him the fruit. Wow. So what are the consequences of eating the forbidden fruit back in the garden? Bayom achalcha mimenu mot tamut. The way the Rambam understands it, okay, who is a famous rabbi, God was saying on the day that you eat from it, you'll become a being that will eventually die. Obviously, if Haman does what he's going to do, he eventually dies, as we know, right? He builds a gallows, but it's not for Mordecai. His reaching for Mordecai, the one thing he can't have, he also becomes a being who is eventually going to die. He himself is hanged on those gallows at the end of the story, as we all know. So why was he hanged on those gallows, on that eitz, on the tree? Haman meets his end after Esther points him out as the villain who will destroy her and her people. Hey, that guy over there? First of all, he wants to kill my uncle, Mordecai, and he wants to kill my people. The king is angry. He is fuming. He goes back into the garden of all places, to the Gan, to think things over. All right, it's a good place to collect your thoughts, I think. When you're really angry, it's good to be away from people, kind of in the middle of the trees, whatever, taking a walk. When he arrives back, he's greeted by a certain member of the court named Harvona. All right, what does he say? I just need to tell you, King, that in the backyard of Haman's house, do you know what there is? There's a huge gallows. All right? He was trying to have that one last thing. He was trying to have Mordecai. Asher diber tov al Hamelech, Mordecai, who had been loyal to you, who had been good to you. So if you remember, Mordecai had saved the king's life when there was somebody who wanted to kill the king earlier on in the book. All right, if you remember. And Mordecai lets him know and saves the king's life. So when the king hears this about the guy trying to kill Mordecai, that's the last straw. Teluhu elav, hang him on those gallows. The king's realization that Haman had reached for the fruit becomes the same reason that Haman himself will die. So, what is it about Haman's ambitions? Okay, now, having seen all of these Tree of Knowledge connections within the Haman and the Zeresh story, I think we're now in a position to understand the very next scene in the story of Esther in the Megillah in a much deeper way. What happens after this little discussion between Haman and his wife over the gallows upon which Mordecai should be hanged? The king can't sleep. He asks for the book of records to be opened and read before him. Because if you remember at that time, everything that the king declared was written in the books and could not be reversed. So he's like, I want to go back and see what happened. Read to me. What happened with this guy Mordecai? Here's about when Mordecai had saved him from an assassination plot. And he says, was there anything ever done to reward this Mordecai for this people? The people say, no, there wasn't. So just then, he hears that there's somebody out in the courtyard. And who is it? It just happens to be Haman himself. Ooh, not good. Haman is there to ask for Mordecai's head. Talk about bad timing, huh? The king brings in Haman, and the king says, what should we do with the man that the king wants to honor? Because remember, Mordecai was saying, hey, there's somebody you should be honoring. So Haman said in his heart, right? Vayomer Haman belubo. Lemi yachvotz hamelech la'asot yakar yoter mimeni. Who would the king want to honor more than me? He's thinking. So he says to the king, Ish asher hamelech chafetz bikaro. Ish means man. Okay, the man the king wants to honor. Oh, yaviu levush malchut asher lobash bo hamelech. Bring in the king's clothes that the king has already worn. All right, he's thinking he's going to be wearing these clothes. Basus asher rakav alav hamelech, and the horse that the king has ridden upon. Wow, he's really thinking he's setting himself up. V'asher nitan keter machut berosho, and that the crown of the king has been on the horse's head. Okay, that's a little weird to me. Why would a crown go on a horse's head? But have one of the king's servants lead this person through the streets and say, thus should you do, the man the king wants to honor. Okay? I mean, you're the king, you're listening to this, you're thinking, all I hear is king, king, king. This guy wants my job. He wants to have my job as king. All right? He sees right through Haman's little scheme here. Haman's transparent desire to be king has never been more evident than this. It's worth wondering why. Why is this the moment in the Megillah where he just cannot contain his ambitions anymore, people? Well, the very last thing that happened is Haman built a gallows for Mordecai. He tried to have the one thing he couldn't have. What's the reason why you should reach for one thing you can't have? So you can pretend that you have no restrictions. So you can pretend you are king. Now, the act of building this gallows for Mordecai is in effect the same thing as wanting to be the king. It's wanting to be entirely unrestricted. You don't have this guy in the way anymore who won't bow down to you. So it's no wonder in the very next part that Haman's obsession with being king simply cannot be contained anymore. And here, by the way, is the real tragedy of it all. He knows he's not king. He's just playing dress up. He's pretending to be the king. He's a fake king. Everyone's looking and said he's king. But that's Adam in the garden too, right? If you had the forbidden fruit, you think you're going to be the king? Or are you going to pretend that you're the owner of the garden? It's all about pretending, if only for a moment, that all of it's mine and that I have no restrictions. All right? So, now, if you think of it, now that hope that we could just pretend we have no restrictions, to pretend that we're king, it's not just about megalomania. It's not just that cartoonish character who says, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. There's a reason why you want it all to be yours. There's a subtle but precious prize here to be gotten. All right? You know what's really in it for you. What is in it for you? What's really in it for you is that if it's all yours, if you're really the owner of the garden, if you really could pretend you're king, then there's no distinction anymore between the two kinds of good, between good in the sense of what I want and good in the sense of the way things should be. The two are the same. What I want is the way things should be. I'm the king. All right. So everyone would just love it if what you desired was the same as the way things ought to be. All right. You would never have to feel guilty about pursuing any desire. The good and the true and the just in your desire. It's all the same. You make the rules, right? So by the way, we can see little bits and pieces of this everywhere in our own lives, right? It's the boss who treats everyone around the office like garbage, but no one can call him on it because he makes the rules. And you know, if you say something, he's going to fire you. It's just the way it is. He doesn't have to feel guilty about it because that's the way it is. What he decides, go. He's the boss, right? All right. So, this issue, this fantasy that you could just conflate the two kinds of good, that there will be no distinction between what you want and what's good and just and right. And that, as we talked about in our uh, first video, is the real soul of the tree of knowledge challenge here. Okay, it's that issue which Haman and Zeresh, his wife, are struggling with at this moment. But it's not just them. All right, the Megillah doesn't just include the bad guys, Haman and Zeresh. It includes good guys too, Mordecai and Esther. If the bad guys are struggling with this tree of knowledge issue, wouldn't the good guys in some way have to be struggling with it as well? So let's take that tree of good and turning that tree of knowledge of good and evil, turn it on its head, so to speak. Okay, so thus far we've seen one tree of knowledge story in the Megillah, in the book of Esther, the story of Haman and Zeresh. Now let's make an audacious suggestion to you that there's actually a second tree of knowledge story playing out in the Megillah at this very same time. All right, if the first story involved the bad guys, Haman and Zeresh, the second tree of knowledge story involves the good guys, Mordecai and Esther. What we're going to see is that as we go through the story involving Mordecai and Esther, we're going to find a whole series of literary parallels linking us back to the tree of knowledge here too. This is getting pretty deep, people. What does it all mean? Well, we have to trace the parallels and see where the evidence points us. But the very intriguing possibility here is that perhaps Mordecai and Esther are struggling with the same issue that Haman and Zeresh were struggling with also. We don't know. So what do we mean when we talk about good? Do you confuse the good in the sense of what I want with the good in the sense of what's right and just and moral? Or can you effectively separate those two and understand the difference between them? So, what was Haman's flaw? Is it corrected? So let's not jump too far ahead. Let's look at the parallels that the Megillah lays out for us. So let's go back to the beginning of the Megillah and play this little game. What reminds us of the Garden of Eden here? So, do you remember the moment where Queen Vashti is done away with and the king is all alone? Remember, she didn't want to dance for him because he was drunk and all the guys around were drunk and he invites her. He wants her to dance for him. Can't say that I blame him, okay? Or blame her. He doesn't have a mate now. He doesn't have a wife. So he figures, I'm going to convene, have a contest. I'm going to gather together all the possible mates, and I'll select one among them who I really like. So now, of course, the king, he's a royal guy. He's going to gather together all these women who are basically inferior to him on the social totem pole. Right back in those days, kings didn't marry necessarily other queens or other royalty. They married women from around the area. They're commoners. He's the king, but it doesn't matter. He's going to accept one of them. He doesn't really care where they come from. All right. In the end, of course, he picks Esther, as we know. Now, this is one of those moments in the story where you sort of seem to see that at least the hidden hand of God. Esther was one in a million pick. Okay, we're talking about who knows how many women he looked at. And she becomes a secret daughter of Israel within the palace. So later on, of course, she's going to become instrumental, as we know, to saving all of the Israelites. So it might seem fair to say that at least on some level, God is the one that picks out this maid for the king Achashverosh. So now we'll stand back and ask ourselves, does this remind us of anything in the very beginning of Genesis? Where else in the entire Hebrew Bible do we find a contest that is convened in which there are all these possible mates people who are sort of inherently inferior, or beings that are inherently inferior, that are brought together to see if this special person could find a mate among them. And in the end, he doesn't find any of those. He except he finds a special person picked for him by God himself. We can find it back in the Garden of Eden. You're saying, what are you talking about? All right, Adam is all alone. God brings all of Adam's inferiors of the beasts of the field in some kind of attempt to find somebody who could be his special mate. And no, not even the dog, who was the man's best friend, could cut it. All right. So in the end, Adam rejects all of the animals one by one after naming them until God puts him to sleep finally, when he wakes up to find the mate that God himself has chosen for him, a special person by the name of Eve. All right, so almost to drive home the comparison between the two stories, the Megillah lets you know the device that Achashverosh, the king, used to select the special mate. He would call her by name. Lo tavo od el hamelech ki im chafet ba hamelech v'nikrea b'shem. Any given woman would never come back to the king unless he called her by name. So once he saw him, if he didn't think about her anymore, he didn't call her. She was no longer even considered. So what does that remind us of in the garden? Naming was what Adam used and it was a device that Adam as well had used to try and find that special mate. God had paraded all the animals in front of him, and he named them all, and he rejects them. All right? He knows their names, as it were, and will never call them back again, just like the king. Except for one, whose name delights him. It's Eve. Her name, Isha, signifies why she is perfect for him. Because if you remember what I said before, Ish means man, Isha means from man. Why will he want to spend the rest of his life with her? Isha, the hey in the Hebrew language at the end of Ish means from Ish, from man. And it's like he's saying, I've called her by name, and I know she's perfect for me. And it's like later on, the king will select his queen only by calling her name, Esther. Now, if it was just this, you might say, well, that's a very interesting coincidence. Two beauty contests in the entire Tanakh in the Old Testament, and the other one just happens to be in the story of the creation of Eve way back in the prelude to the tree of knowledge. But even if I accept that, you said that this was a forbidden fruit story, another tree of knowledge story. How is that the case? Well, let's keep on going. So let's talk about forbidden fruit. Eve has been created, and there she is in the garden. She's surrounded by all these trees, and she can eat from all these trees. Life is pretty unrestricted, right? There's just one command that she has to follow. One! There's this forbidden fruit, and it contains this mysterious forbidden knowledge. Adam and Eve are both told that if they get this knowledge, they're going to die. They're going to become mortal. Ultimately, of course, Eve does take the fruit and she gives it to her husband to share in this forbidden knowledge. So let's come back to the story, to the Megillah. After the beauty contest, what happens? Is there a command given to the Megillah's version of Eve in this story of Esther? Is there forbidden knowledge in which she does not dare to impart to her husband? Absolutely yes. It's her identity that becomes a forbidden knowledge. Esther is chosen queen. The Megillah says, but ein Esther magedet moladeta. Esther would not tell of her identity, her birthplace, that she was in fact a daughter of Israel. Kasher tziva aleha Mordechai, because Mordecai had commanded her not to. One more time, there's a woman who must not impart knowledge to her husband. It's forbidden knowledge. It could get you killed. So, by the way, it's not just the general idea that's the same here. The language is the same. Back in Eden, Vayatzav Hashem Elokim al Ha'adam le'imor. God commanded Adam, saying, all right, but actually, literally speaking, it's not God commanded Adam. Vayetzav Hashem Elokim al ha'adam. God commanded upon Adam. Okay, so it's a strange kind of language. It's not the way you would normally say it. But interestingly, that same strange twist appears in the Megillah, in this story. A command upon. Ki Mordechai tziva ale shelo tagid. Mordecai had commanded upon Esther not to say anything about where she comes from. So, and while we're considering language here, if Mordecai really is sort of occupying the God role, as it were, from the Garden of Eden, in other words, God was the one who had commanded Adam and Eve for the first time about forbidden knowledge. And now Mordecai is the one issuing those commands to the new Eve, to Esther, about what she must and must not tell her husband. It's interesting that the text talks about him strolling in the palace gates and uses a very strange word, U Mordechai mitalech. Okay, what does that mean? Mitalech is a hitpael form of walk in Hebrew. It's a very unusual form to describe a person walking. It only happens 2 times actually in the whole New Testament, or the Old Testament, sorry. What it sort of means is that he took himself for a walk. He's just strolling along. Maybe his hands are behind the back. I don't know. This is the last time the word mitalek is ever used in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so we know when was the first time was it used? Back in the Garden of Eden, when God was mitalek in the garden. God was strolling in the garden. All right, so it means basically to stroll. Seemingly, the Megillah is kind of cueing us in here. Okay, Mordecai really is occupying the role of the commander in this case, the one who commands about forbidden fruit. But if all of that is correct, if the interaction between Mordecai, Esther, and the king really does mimic the Tree of Knowledge story, the Megillah's version of that story is about to turn on its head. All right, you may be aware that the Megillah is an upside down book. In the words of the Megillah itself, V'nahafoch hu, and it was all reversed. All right, so what is the reverse? Here too, we're going to get an incredible reverse. Right in the middle of this Tree of Knowledge replay, Mordecai, the very person that had commanded Esther not to impart this forbidden knowledge about her true identity to the king, now comes to her and says, tell him the forbidden knowledge. She's like, what? Haman has issued his decree. Now you have to go and tell him who you are and beg him to save your people, your countrymen. The one who says you can't impart that knowledge, whatever you do, never say anything. Now says, no, the reverse is true. Go feed the forbidden fruit to your husband. Go tell him. Now it's interesting that the Megillah, this story, who had used the word before, tziva, command, to characterize Mordecai's insistence that she not tell, now uses the same word to characterize his insistence that she does tell. So in the words of the verse, ulitzavot ale lavo et hamelech. He commanded her to come to the king, to go to the king. What does Esther say in response to this? She says something that actually fits totally with this tree of knowledge theory. She says, I can't do it, I'll die. Wow, I wish Eve would have said the same thing when Satan was trying to tempt her at the tree. I can't do this, I'm sorry, I'm going to die. You would think that might want to persuade somebody not to do something. So, if we're thinking tree of knowledge, it's no wonder. Whenever you give forbidden knowledge, death is right around the corner, and Esther gets it. Okay, so, Kol ish bisha asher yavui el amelech el chatzer hapnimit. Anyone who goes to the king without being invited, being called, achat datol lehamit. They're taking their lives in their hands. They're going to be killed. At least the possibility is pretty great. Okay, probably had a good 95% chance you'd be dead. Now, you want me to go? What? Give this forbidden knowledge, this really unpopular news to the king? It's not going to make him happy that his queen is from that really unpopular nation, the one that his Secretary of State is going to wipe out in one blood-soaked Holocaust-like day. I don't think he's going to take that too well. Remember, the decree had already been given that Haman could wipe out the Israelites. So, yeah, he might have been happy to take a queen from anyone among any commoner. But now that Haman has made the Jews kind of the dregs of society, how happy is he going to be to hear that I'm from these people? If it wasn't bad enough that I'm going to go to him when I'm not invited, listen to what I'm telling him. You think he's going to want to hear this? It's going to be off with my head. Now, as if to complete the sense of the complete reversal of the original Tree of Knowledge story, listen to what Mordecai responds to her. No, no, Esther, you've got it the other way around. You've got to go to the king. Now he says, Im hakaresh tacharishi ba'et hatzot. If you keep silent, revach behatzala ya'amod laYehudim mimokom acher. One way or another, God will save us. But va'at ubet abich tabedu. All right, you and your father's house are going to be ultimately destroyed. So whether you go or not, you're going to die. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? So it's death you're worried about. If you don't go to him, that's when you will be destroyed. It's the complete reverse. What have you got to lose right now, right? So she says, fine, I'll take my life in my hands. So I'll go to the king and impart to him this forbidden knowledge of who I really am. I'm just going to lay it out there. But then she says, if you're going to play upside down, I have a command for you, my friend. My uncle, Lech, kenos et kol hayudim, gather all of the Israelites together, vitzumu alai, and you and them will fast. Al tochlu, do not eat for 3 days. All right, this is serious stuff. It's as if Esther is saying to them, it began, Mordecai, when you told me I mustn't share forbidden knowledge. You want me to eat of the forbidden fruit and to give it to my husband? And I, the command, will turn around and make the commanded will turn around and make a command of you. And that command of you will be do not eat. Now, of course, Mordecai listens to her and does what she says. He goes and tells the people, Vayas kechol asher tzivta ahlav Esther. And he did all that Esther commanded him. So it's like everything has reversed itself, the entire Tree of Knowledge story. So Esther is now left with a very serious challenge. She's got to tell the king who she really is. And it's like Mordecai is telling her, find a way to give that forbidden knowledge to your husband. You can do it. All right? Way back in the garden, Eve gave Adam the fruit and the results were disastrous. Now you need to find a way to give him the forbidden knowledge in order to avert disaster. If she finds a way to accomplish this task, she will redeem the original Tree of Knowledge story in a way. Okay? She will go through the exact same act that Eve did when she gave the forbidden fruit to Adam. All right? However, using the medium of food, and just like Eve at a banquet, she's going to give knowledge that's very, very dangerous to her. She's going to impart this knowledge to her husband, except that act, instead of being destructive, will be a very compassionate act. Okay, it'll be a saving act. It will not kill, it will save all of the people of Israel. So as we shall see, though, Esther faces a very, very great challenge. In order to somehow give this knowledge to the king in the right way, she's going to have to do it in a way that distinguishes between the two types of good. She's going to have to clearly demarcate what desire looks like and how that's different from the right thing to do. Now, when she does that, she will have finally redeemed the great tree of knowledge, sin, in a way. Okay? As we all know, Yeshua is actually the only one who truly redeemed the tree of knowledge, sin, when he himself was hung on the tree on the cross. but we'll get back to that later. Now, how Esther does this forms a climax of this story, of this narrative, a climax that we will understand ever more deeply when we keep the tree of knowledge in mind as we read it. Okay, so redeeming the tree. The story of the Megillah now proceeds towards its climax. In the scenes that follow, we will find Esther approaching the king 4 times, each time taking one step closer towards her goal, the salvation of her people. Now, if we follow the Megillah's language as she makes these 4 attempts, we're going to actually find her using this language of Tov and Ra within her entreaties to the king. Tov is good, Ra is evil. But not just talking about both Tov and Ra, but talking about it in a certain way, talking about it in the right kind of way, okay? That will reach into the king's heart. It's almost like there's a little game that this story is playing with us, a literary game. Can Esther, in imparting this forbidden knowledge to the king, in other words, in this case, her identity, can she string together the words Tov, which is good, and Ra, for evil, such that she actually tells the king something about the nature of Tov and Ra itself, what good and evil actually looks like? In other words, can she talk to him, not just about what he wants to do, but about what he ought to do? Can she use these words Tov and Ra in a way that actually helps clarify rather than obscure the meaning of these 2 words? If she can successfully do that, she can redeem the original Tree of Knowledge story. She can find a way to give her husband forbidden knowledge, as it were, in a way that conveys accurate knowledge of good and evil. So rather than its counterfeit, the self-serving blindness of if I want it, it must be right. So let's watch Esther do this now. So let's get into the hanging of Haman. First thing she does is she invites the king to a banquet. Listen to her invitation. Im al hamelech tov. If it's good for the king, if it pleases the king, what kind of tov is she talking about here? Well, obviously she's talking about desire. All right. Im al hamelech tov. If you like this, if it's good for you. Of course, kings want things that they like, right? So what's happening is she's sort of using the word tov, but she actually hasn't gotten to the point where she's actually imparting to the king any kind of moral clarity. So far, she's still just in the world of his desires. Now let's continue. After the king comes to the banquet, she says, "Why don't you come back to another banquet?" The king's, of course, very happy, right? He likes to eat. She gave a good banquet. One more time, she says, "Im al hamelech tov," if it pleases the king. But still, she's just talking about his desires. And notably, she hasn't mentioned the word ra, evil. All right, the other side of the equation. She'll get to that at the right time. It's like the Megillah itself is going out of its way to tell us the task isn't complete. She hasn't really given the knowledge. She hasn't talked to him about her identity yet. She's only halfway there. There's the tov. Well, but what about the ra, the evil? What about the stuff he doesn't want to hear? Well, we got to keep going. So she keeps on going. The next time she meets him, let's listen into what she says during her next and final banquet to the king. At the last banquet, she begins as she did before. Imal hamelech tov, if it pleases the king. Here she says, Tinaten li nafshi bishailati. Excuse me. Give me my life as my request. Vami bivakashati. And give me my people's lives too. Here's the point where she reveals who she is. She gives him this forbidden knowledge. In fact, if we go back to the little game, she now has both sides of the coin. Because she doesn't just talk about Tov, she talks about Ra, evil. The word even appears, and the king says, "Who is this who threatens you?" She points over to Haman, the other guy the only other guy at the banquet, and says, "Haman hara hatzeh, this evil man." She's now talked to him about both good and evil. Seemingly, she's done her job. She's given him the knowledge. She's talked about Tov. She's talked about Ra. What else do you want from her? We can all go home, right? We're done. However, if we read the story carefully, we can't all go home yet. So even though the king hangs Haman, the decree against the Jews still stands, because when a king at that time in that area made a decree, it was set in stone, could not be changed. So if the story ends here, then the Jews all die, which means the queen has to approach the king one last time, the fourth time. Oy! Abolishing Haman's decree to kill the Jews. How can we do this? Now, if we go back to the story, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you say to yourself, but I don't understand. She's done everything, right? She's talked about Tov, she's talked about Ra, good and evil, she's given the forbidden knowledge. What more does she need to do? She hasn't really made a moral case before the king. Everything so far has just been a function of his desire. She has to talk to him not just about his desires, but now she needs to talk about what's right, and she hasn't done that yet. So if we think about everything she's done, it really all just boils down to what the king wants to do. Remember her words that she repeats over and over again in each of these three times. Im al hamalech tov, im al hamalech tov, im al hamalech tov. She always says it. If it pleases the king, if it pleases the king, if it pleases the king. But if she never moves on from this point, if she just stays with the king's desire, then it's really all about what he wants to do, and that's not a moral argument, people. As a matter of fact, if I'm the king and I think it's just about what I want to do, so then I look at you, Esther, and I say, well, you're asking me to save you. If that's what I want to do, yeah, I love you, I'll save you. You ask me to save your people, maybe not so much. I really don't love them so much. If it's really Esther, what about what I want to do? You haven't really taken me anywhere. You haven't convinced me about anything. This is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. All of your people will die because it's been decreed, and that's fine with me. So at this moment, Haman is dead. Yes, but the decree against the Jews, that still stands. If the story ends here, then all the Israelites die. Esther needs to go to the king. Esther needs to make one last appeal, and it cannot stop with what he wants to do. It has to end with what's right for him to do. So a few days later, she goes back to the king for one last desperate plea. She begins with his desire, the same way she began before. Vatomer im al hamalech tov. And she says, if it pleases the king. But then she takes a gentle step forward. Remember, we're talking about the king here. She makes one more introductory comment to the king. Not just im al hamalech tov, if it's pleasing in your eyes, but v'kasher hadavar lifnei hamalech. If the thing seems right, seems fitting before the king. Now here, the word kasher is a much more objective word than tov. It's a word that signifies the other meaning of tov, good and right. It's interesting to note here that this is actually the only time in all of the Hebrew Bible that the adjective kasher is ever used, okay? And when in Leviticus we talk about kosher food, the word kosher isn't actually used, all right? It's phrased in terms of tameh and tahor, pure and impure. Okay, that's it. But the modern sense of us talking about something that is kosher that was completely brought in later to define, okay, these things. The only source for that idea of kosher is an adjective is right here in the Tanakh, in this part of the Bible. It's what Esther tells the king right now, and it's very fitting. So let's look at what she says. If it pleases you and the thing is fitting, kasher. The queen is beginning to take the king on a little journey here. She's taking him from a journey from his desires, from what he wants to do to what he ought to do. Let's see how she continues this journey. Well, the next thing she does is she invokes the word tov one more time. Here again, she's taking a gentle step, baby step, with the king. V'tova ani be'inav. And if I am good in your eyes, if you look upon me and see good, then I have an argument to make to you, king. Okay? Echacha uchal v'ra iti bera'a asher yimtza et ami. How can you expect me to stand in this palace, safe and sound, and watch the destruction of my people? Watch the evil that would befall upon them. How can you expect me to do that? So there it is. She's using Tov and Ra one more time, good and evil. But this time in a way that actually begins to make a moral argument. She's leveraging his desire to talk about what's actually right and what's wrong. Her argument goes like this. If I am good in your eyes, if you really love me, then it would be an act of terrible evil to allow someone you love to witness the demise of all of her people, of all her countrymen. It would be wrong to do that. All right? So the truth is the moral overtones in her argument go even deeper than this. Because we go back to those loaded words. Im tova ani be'inav. If I am good in your eyes. And ask what those words really mean now. So we see in the past they might have meant if I please you. Tov, just in terms of you desire me. But that was before you knew who she really was. Now he knows who she is. So we think to ourselves, what has she revealed to him? The greatest reason why he should hate her. She's from the vermin of people that were supposed to be exterminated by his Secretary of State. Okay. You know, it's one thing to love her when she was an anonymous girl, when he could pretend that she was anyone, but now, once she reveals the truth, I'm from the lowest of the low, the dregs of society, at least in the opinion of these people, and now look me in the eye, king. Do you still love me? If you look at me, Tova ani beinav, and I am still good in your eyes. If you still care for me, as indeed you must, because you killed Haman, and you preserved me, then I'm going to extend this argument and use it to have you recognize not just my humanity, but the humanity of my people. So in effect, she's really taking him on to the following place. If you've accepted me and my identity, if it is my humanity that you are willing to accept despite my being one of them, then whether you like it or not, you have to tolerate and accept them as basic human beings too. You have to keep them alive. Save my people. And it's at that moment Esther finally redeems the story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil in her own little way. She has found a way to convey forbidden knowledge, dangerous knowledge, knowledge that by rights should kill her, to her husband, and has found a way to bring moral clarity to his vision. So what does Haman's story teach us on the Feast of Purim and the Feast of Esther? So I mentioned to you before that the story of this Megillah can be seen as a kind of battle between two ways of replaying the Tree of Knowledge story. We have taken some time now to understand the dynamics between Esther and the king, Achashverosh, and how Esther seems to redeem the original Tree of Knowledge story in this little part. Now, to complete our view of the magnificence of what she does, we need to go back one last time to the failed Tree of Knowledge replay, to the story of Zeresh and Haman. So in the contrast between the failure and the success, we will find something very surprising, people. We will find the key to the power of love. All right? So having looked at Zeresh and Haman on the one hand as one kind of failed expression of the tree of knowledge story, and having looked at Esther's interactions with the king on the other hand as a sort of successful replay of the tree of knowledge story, I think one of the surprising things that emerges from this is a rule of love as a potential moral force, as a force for good. Now, in order for love to be that force for good, it requires some backbone. Okay? Sometimes, almost paradoxically, it requires standing up to the one that you love and demanding something different from him or her than what they think they want. Okay? So let's go back to Esther and the king for a minute. As we spoke about in our last video that we did last week, what she's really doing is starting with the king's desire, but then taking him to somewhere that he may actually not want to go on his own. She makes that journey from good in terms of desire to good in terms of what's right to do. She makes a moral argument to him. So here we have the story of Haman and Zeresh's failure. Zeresh never makes that journey. She starts with what Haman wants to do and ends with what Haman wants to do. So you don't like everything in your life, and the one thing that you're missing is Mordecai, and you want to kill him? Sure, why not do that? Why don't you kill him? That way you'll go to the king's feast and you'll be happy. She's trying to make him happy. Little does she know that this lack of backbone, this lack of using her love for her husband to help him, would eventually help her too, right? Because in the end, he dies, but not only does he die, all of his sons die. They all get killed. Not such a good thing. So, the tragedy here is that Zeresh thinks she's doing the right thing for him. She's trying to help him facilitate his desires. What more can someone want for their spouse, right? Or from their spouse than someone who will just fulfill every desire they could possibly have. Yeah, I want to go do this thing. And she says, yeah, I'll do it. All right. It's not always the right thing. So she says, go make the tree, go make this gallows. She starts with desires and ends with his desires. And if that's all you do, you're not really much of a spouse. Okay, so we need to go with the person's desires, but then see, okay, what are these desires going to do to him, to me, to us, to others? Is it good? So the original role of a spouse, as defined way back in the Garden of Eden, was to be an Edzer Kenegdo, a helper, someone who could help them, but also someone who could oppose them. Say, hey, not a good thing, right? The word Edzer Kenegdo means to help and to oppose, and sometimes the way you help most is by opposing. All right, maybe if Adam at that point had said to Eve, not a good idea, right? Unfortunately, Adam came after Eve had eaten from the tree, so he really couldn't do anything to stop that, right? But maybe if Eve had said, Adam, I ate the fruit. Don't do it. It's terrible. I'm naked. Whatever. I don't know. But maybe that would have been nice. Anyway, the word, sometimes the word edzer kenegdo means help and to oppose. Sometimes you have to just stand up and say no. The way I'm going to make you happy actually is by opposing, not just catering to your desires, but helping you place those desires in context, helping you to see what's right here. Okay, obviously, we don't just want to oppose people to oppose. That's just called being a jerk. All right, but now ask yourself this, a little bit of a deeper question. How do you help a spouse to see what's right? Even if I say these words, isn't there a part of all of us that our flesh is kind of crawling here? We're saying, 1 second here, I don't want my spouse to teach me moral lessons. I don't want my spouse to preach at me. I would be enraged. I would be angry if they tell me what's right and wrong. I want them to love me for who I am. I hate to say it, people, but even Yeshua, Jesus, when he was there on the earth, didn't just go around telling people, hey, I love you, man. Oh, keep going the way you're going. It's good. Yeah, he went up to the lady at the well and said, hey, he's talking about, hey, come bring your husband here. And she's like, I don't have a husband. He's like, yeah, you're right. You've had a few. And the guy you're with now, you're not married to him. He didn't do it in a way to bring her down, but he's like, hey, I know the truth here. I want something better for you, right? Same thing with people who are dealing with certain types of sins in their life. We don't want to just say, hey, I love you. Jesus loves you just the way you are. Jesus does love them, and we need to love them too. But we need to say, hey, if you continue on this path, it's going to bring you destruction. It's not only going to bring you physical death, all right? It's going to bring you eternal death. There's hell. Okay, we want people to come to Jesus and repent. So that's what I'm trying to say here. Not only is this talking about spouses, this is talking about people in our lives, okay? So let's remember that. So here's the amazing thing. These two things, what's right and loving someone for who they really are at a very deep level, these two things are very intertwined. Loving someone for who they are is actually the greatest moral truth you can ever impart to your spouse or those you know. It's true for Zeresh and Haman, and it's also true for Esther and the king. And let's see why. So let's go to Zeresh and Haman now. What's the greatest gift that Zeresh could have given Haman, her husband, at that moment when he came home so devastated? I have everything, he tells her. I have riches, I have children, I have power, but none of them means anything to me. All I want is the one thing I can't have, he tells her. All I want is Mordecai dead. Wow, what gift could she have given him at that moment? Honey, you have all this. Who cares about that guy? Oh, he's a loser if he doesn't bow down to you. Who cares? Don't worry about him. He's just one guy. All right, you have everything. You got me, you got the kids, you got the house, you got the donkeys, you got money, you got everything. You got this great position. You are, you're working for the king. Wow. So what could she have said? She could have said, look at you. You're not valuing yourself for who you are. Why do you think you don't like anything that you have? Is it a coincidence that every last thing you have you don't like? Not satisfied? You hate, you think you don't like the Israelites. You don't like even more than the Jews, than the Israelites. You hate yourself. I personally, if I was his wife, I would have probably been a little bit offended, saying, oh, yeah, you don't like us? You don't like what you got? Get out of here. I don't know. It's because you hate yourself that you hate every last thing that you have. And if you had the one thing that you don't have, you would hate that too. Think about it. Sometimes we want something so bad that when we finally get it, we're not happy with it. We don't even like it. How many times has that happened to me? To you? So stop thinking about your desires. What you really need to do is start liking what you have. Maybe if you start liking what you have, you'll start liking you. If you don't believe that, just look at me. I don't need you to have the one thing you don't have in order to like you. I love you for who you are. If that's enough for me, can it be enough for you? That's what she could have said to Haman right there. Maybe it would have just totally put him at peace. I don't know. Maybe he still would have been the way he was. Maybe he would have gone on to his destruction. But she didn't. Had she been able to give that gift to him, it would have been the first stepping stone possibly to break out of the prison of desire and to be able to see the other meaning of good. What is right, and what is true? What is noble? It could have saved Mordecai's life in the end. He didn't die, but if he had died, it might have saved her husband's life too, and her children, her sons, which were all killed later on. In a deep way, Esther was just doing the inverse of this thing with the king. Zeresh could have accepted Haman for who he was. Esther demands that the king that he accepts her for who she really is. Esther's argument is, it's not enough that you love me as an anonymous person. Why don't you find out who I really am? Where I really come from? Can you still love me then? Can you accept me then? When he does, she finally wins her first battle. But then she leverages that love even further. And it's not enough for you to just accept me. I need you to accept the existence of my countrymen, of my people also. You can't stop with recognizing just my own humanity. If I'm a human and I am from them, then they are human too. Aren't they? All right. So, all told, in this story, we see just underneath the surface two competing ways of replaying the same story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's almost as if the tree of knowledge of good and evil kind of splits into two parts. Okay, so let's correct Haman's failed replay of the tree. One way of replaying the story is to give your spouse the one thing that he or she doesn't have yet, to cater to his or her every desire, and in so doing, destroy them. That's a Zeresh and Haman. All right, the failed replay of the tree of knowledge. Now, the other way is to provide forbidden knowledge, knowledge that might seem dangerous but is actually essential. knowledge about who you really are and to ask that your spouse accept you for that. Esther does this and takes the king on a journey from what you might have thought you wanted to do what is right and good. In the end, Esther is a heroine of the Megillah of this story, but her actions might be significant at not just locally, right, for the many hundreds of thousands that she saved, but even more globally, right, on the historical scale. Because if she hadn't, the Israelites would have been killed, except for maybe her, maybe Mordecai. So for right here, at the very end of the Hebrew Bible, someone has finally put to rest the terrible crime that has haunted many people ever since the enchanting, confusing fruit of the tree of knowledge first beckoned to us. Okay, all of mankind. So Yeshua, on the other hand, did the same thing. He took this same thing, that same kind of love, and reversed it for us by hanging himself on the tree in the place of us, by becoming sin so that we may receive his free gift of salvation. All it says in the Bible is those who believe in him will be saved. Those who confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he is the Lord and Lord of lords and King of kings, that he is the Savior, that he came to the earth and died for our sins and was raised on the third day. And he is coming back very soon, people. Very, very soon. We don't have much time left. So I would like to invite any of you who would like to accept Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, as your Savior, to do so now while you still can. It says in the Bible that Jesus did not come to condemn, but to save. However, that time is being shortened, okay? There's not much time left, like I said, okay? He's calling, he's knocking. He's saying, hey, I'm about to come back. When I come back, it's going to be too late. Okay, so it's time to look upon the story of what we just read and realize that Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, is still this, has redeemed the story of this failed tree of knowledge, what happened in the Garden of Eden. So I would like to just close with you in prayer and thank you, Father, for allowing me to spend time with my friends here on Facebook in this live video. I hope it has touched many people's hearts, and I hope it has been a blessing. And as I close this time, I ask that you will just bring peace to those who are not at peace in this crazy time when here in Italy we are forced to stay inside of our houses and can only go out for necessary things. It's not an easy time for those who are in other countries, in America, and other countries where this is just starting to happen. Bring peace to those who are yours, and Father, bring peace to those who don't belong to you. May Jesus be shown in a concrete way, in a real way, to those who do not know him yet. And I ask this in your name, Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. I would like to close with the beautiful blessing in Hebrew, the Aaronic blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai b'yishmerecha. Yair Adonai panav alecha b'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav alecha b'yisim lecha shalom. B'shem Yeshua HaMashiach sar ha-shalom shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah, the Prince of Peace. Shalom. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate if you leave any comments. Like I said, if you want prayer, please ask for us to pray. If you have anything you want to share with us, please share. May you be blessed in Jesus. Now for the Aaronic blessing. Adesso la benedizione di Aarone. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yair Adonai panav alecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom.
L'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sarha Shalom Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua the Messiah, the Prince of Peace. Shalom.
Che il Signore vi benedica e vi protegga. Il Signore faccia risplendere il suo volto su di voi e vi sia propizio. Che il Signore elevi il suo volto su di voi e vi dia la pace. In nome di Yeshua, Gesù, il Messia, il Principe della pace. Shalom.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom. Shabbat shalom.